Hello, welcome to the next lesson in our series, Feeding Your Relationships. So in our last lesson, you had an assignment for a health check. How did that go? Did you find areas in your relationship that need some improvement? I know we all have them. And even those who appear to have great relationships still need improvement. Even though I teach this, I still have to continue to feed my spouse every day or he will feel starved. And that is a challenge for us. Each day we get to work on that. And sometimes we just need a little snack, and other times we need an entire meal. So it is good to have feedback so that we know where we are at. Today is the third lesson in our series, and it is called The Starved Spiral. So as an entrepreneur, you need lots of support, and you will want to be fed in order to perform all that is needed. But your partner and your family will also want to be fed. And so we're going to work on that. You are probably one of the most important reasons, or they are probably one of the most important reasons that you do what you do. And when the needs aren't being met, then you will begin to feel starved. And we just want to be fed, even if it's just a little bit of food. And remember from last time we said that starved people starve people. And you can see that in the handout that is provided. So when you don't feel safe in a relationship, you will start to feel starved. And odds are, if you are starving, then you will also start to starve your partner. And they starve you, and you starve them, and it goes back and forth, right? I starve you, you starve me, and we end up starving each other. And this is how it begins, this downward spiral. And look at the handout that I provided you. It has a picture of the spiral and what we will be talking about today. So you may feel justified in starving your partner because you're starving. And this is where we get into the blame game. Well, he started it first. Well, she started it. And this, of course, is never helpful when we play the blame game. And I really only need one of you to have enough character to stop playing the blame game and to get out of the spiral. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So couples end up in basically this starved delirium, right? That if their needs aren't being met, they don't know what to do. Same thing with food. If we're starving and we haven't eaten for a while, we actually start to become delirious. And so we end up being blinded by our selfishness, and the condition of the other person becomes irrelevant because our needs are just not being met. And we begin to tire of not being fed by our partner. And so we just begin to feed ourselves. It's just human nature. If one of our needs are not being met, then we find a way to have those needs met. And not knowing what to do, we end up in a standoff. And so then both of you are starving, and you're just craving nothing but just to receive love and attention from your partner. So as a result, what happens is the relationship ends up wasting away. And why do you starve your partner? Because personally inside, you're feeling starved, and maybe you're hurt. And so it's hard for you to want to feed the other person. But if we want to have a healthy relationship, we need to start making different choices. And those choices are based on our most highest values and our principles that we believe in. And over time, those choices will help us to make the changes that we need. But what happens when we're in a starved mindset? That's a little bit different. And fear starts to be a big impact in our relationship. And from how we act to what we say to what we don't say, this fear will creep in. So some of the examples are when we feel fear, we feel guilty and we start blaming others. When we fear being judged, then we criticize others. When we fear the truth, then we don't ask the tough questions. And when we are fear of being wrong, we turn everything into a debate. You can see how these types of patterns and thinking will guide you down the spiral. So if you look at the spiral, you can see that there are 6 conditions. So what are these conditions? Well, the first one is selfishness. And when our needs are not being met, we find ways to meet them. This is just human nature. Just like our bodies, if we're hungry, we're seeking food. And it's a basic human need. So if we are starved in our relationships, then we start to feed ourselves. And this is where we become selfish. The more our needs aren't being met, the more we will find ways to have those needs met. And can you predict what will happen in a relationship if one partner becomes selfish? The other partner becomes selfish, and then you start reacting to one another. And that's the next condition of the spiral, is this reactivity. So after you become selfish and you're reacting to one another, that's what ends up fueling the starve spiral. And the problem with reactivity in relationships is that the big issues get repeated and they're perpetuated over and over again. And this is how we end up going down that spiral. And reactivity really is just the inability to choose to do something better and to do something different. So it's basically like a dog chasing its tail. You're not ever going to end. It's just going to, I'm negative, you're negative, and it goes back and forth. So this is the pattern of, I don't want to serve you and you don't want to serve me, and I'm not going to help you because you're not helping me. And it just ends up perpetuating this negative cycle. And this is where you get into like the self-fulfilling prophecies. People may say that something bad is going to happen, and then they react in a way that makes it happen. So we become very reactive, and this reactivity leads to us being polarized. So this polarization is the next condition of the spiral. And when we're polarized, we're on opposite sides. And this happens when couples are reactive and they're taking an opposite stance on positions. Couples feel like everything is polarized, and this is what makes things smoky. In lesson 1, we talked about those issues. And in the beginning of our relationship, think about how you were very united in all the choices that you made. Think about most of the time in the beginning of relationships, everything is hunky-dory, right? But when things start to go south and we head down that spiral, this is where we have one partner who is heated and one who may have a headache. You have one who is a spender and one who is a saver. And think about when you were first in love, maybe you were trying to save money for something. You end up going out to eat and you're like, oh, I'm not that hungry. Let's just share a meal. Oh yeah, let's just split it. I'll just have half a hamburger and you can have the other half. And the reason you did things like that is because you were very united. You had a goal and that's what you were doing. And now what happens? Probably not so much. So some other examples are when you have someone who is social, can't see my hands here in the camera, versus someone who's antisocial, right? You have someone who's neat versus someone who's sloppy. You have someone who's a morning person and someone who is an evening person. And so ideally we fall somewhere in between those. Not all the time are we polarized opposites, but what happens is we end up sliding down that spiral and we become more and more polarized and everything becomes negative. And when everything becomes negative, that's just what we call a negative interpretation. A negative interpretation, it just has a negative spin on everything. So what happens is we have the inability to see anything positive that's happening in our relationships. And the 2 big problems with this are, 1, when someone is negatively interpreting, even if the other partner is actually trying to change and they're trying harder and they're doing things, the other person doesn't see any of those changes. And instead they choose to see things as, well, everything is the same, or maybe it's just it's too little too late, so it's over. The second problem is that those negative feelings lead to negative actions, which only end up starving your partner more. And when you're starving your partner, then you get starved. So it just makes things worse. And this negative person starts to interpret everything negative. And then what happens is they end up rewriting their past negatively and think, oh, well, this was negative from the beginning. When we first got together, I could see signs everything has always been terrible. And in most cases, that's not how it was, but that's how we are choosing to interpret it. So this negative partner sees everything negative. One example is you decide to buy her some red roses. You come home, you bring her the red roses, and she's just mad that they're not pink. And she's like, my favorite color is pink. I don't even know why you bought me red roses. So just little things like that you will always see as negative. And really this negative interpretation is the death. It's kind of the beginning of the death of the relationship. Both partners will begin to project this negative self-fulfilling prophecy, and it becomes a natural follow-up to our selfishness, our reactivity, and when we're polarized. And when those things start happening, we feel hopeless. And that's the next condition in the spiral. And as we head down that spiral with this negativity, of course, we begin to feel hopeless. And if selfishness, reactivity, polarization, and negative interpretation are the roots, right? We're laying down our roots of negativity in this spiral, then sadly, hopelessness is the fruit. So all of those things we've laid ground, and what grows is hopelessness. And in the absence of three very basic components in a relationship, we're going to feel hopeless. And so the first thing that we need to have is a shared vision. And when we don't have a shared vision, we're hopeless. The second thing is a shared plan. So we may have a vision, but we actually have to have a focused plan on what we're going to do. And then the third thing is to have consistent action on that shared plan. So when we don't have any of those things, we start to feel hopeless. And hopelessness becomes the expectation that things will never change. And I'm going to feel hopeless because I know that my needs are never going to be met by this person. And they perceive that their partner doesn't have the character to live up to those standards or those values. And they feel hopeless when they see that their communication patterns are so ineffective and everything seems to turn into an argument, and no longer do they see any type of positivity in their partner or their future in the relationship. So this is actually kind of like if you've ever seen the movie Groundhog Day. And so you're stuck in this endless loop, day after day, over and over, and you don't see any way out. And so it becomes very torturous. And that's what people feel like. They lack the vision to be able to get out of the spiral and to do anything to change their lives. They feel like they don't have the power to do that. And when that's how you're viewing things, it's very easy to abandon the relationship. And that's why the last part of the spiral is abandonment. That's just the final stage. You've had it, you're ready to walk away. And this person who walks away from the relationship, they can walk away literally, like walk away, or they leave the relationship emotionally. So they're like, I'm done, checking out. I might just have my body here, but I'm checked out. And most couples end up abandoning their relationship before they even really know what happened or why they're in this spot. And when this happens, it ensures, sadly, that they'll probably repeat the same pattern into the next relationship. So I usually tell couples, you are in a certain spot in this spiral. And if you leave a relationship and you don't figure out what happened or what went wrong, then you end up taking those unhealthy patterns into the next relationship, and it just perpetuates the problems. And so this is why we see second marriage divorce rates at 60%, and third marriages have a divorce rate of 70 to 80%. And the reason that those marriages fell is because they assume that their partner was the one that caused all the problems, but what they don't understand is their part of the problem and what they did to contribute to the end of the relationship. I do, however, want to make one clarifying statement in all of this, and that is, I'm not saying that you should always stay in a relationship. There are good reasons and appropriate times when a relationship should end, and I want you to be able to understand what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again if this is a situation that you're in. And so when people start reacting to their starved needs and they start proactively choosing to love, the direction of the spiral begins to change. So remember that the antidote to the starved spiral is to actually begin loving one another. So how do you do this? Well, guess what? You are going to get another opportunity assignment to feed your partner through the homework assignment. So I'm going to explain this a little bit, and don't worry because all of the details are on your handout. But this is called the feeding homework, and the first thing is to change your focus. So instead of focusing on getting your needs met, I want you to work together to be able to get our needs met, right? So how do you do this? The first thing I want you to do is just to plan a date with your partner. I want you to spend time doing something that the both of you enjoy. So that way your focus is on each other. The next part of the homework assignment is that I want you to clearly identify and live by your values. So when you do this, your relationship decisions become we-centered instead of me-centered. It is we, right? The two of us. And these are based on long-term needs and not special situations or events, right? Sometimes people think, oh, well, if I have this special event, I'm going to choose to do something differently. These values can be things like integrity, honesty, family, home, community, even humor. Whatever is important to you, I want you to choose those values. So the assignment is to make a list of your values, and then once you've made that list, I want you to prioritize it. And think about, if you were really living your values, how would your relationship change for the better? And the last thing is to make a plan. I want you to do something. And I want you to be able to have this plan, and I want you to have it in place so that when challenges come up, that you'll be able to deal with them. And don't rush this process. You may have to start with your own version of your vision or your plan, but then I want you to be able to include your partner. And remember that couples who feel hopeless do not have a shared vision, nor do they act on that plan. So I want you to be able to take action. And if you take the time to do this and to create your together plan, you will see results. So next time I will see you for the final training. Good luck on your homework. I hope you enjoy creating your plan, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much.